welcome. Welcome to our Women and Blended Families live stream. We are doing this monthly, and we're so glad to have you. Our topic this month is co-parenting with a former spouse. So if you know someone that needs to hear some good information on this topic, tag them in the comments right quick, and let's see if we can have people join us. We can watch the live version. We'll also have a recorded version that people can watch. And then also, we will be taking questions. So as you think of a question, maybe as we go through our live stream, throw that up in the comments and we'll address those as we can. The ones that we can't get to live, we'll also take time to answer questions in the comments. And today, I'm so excited to have my friend Tammy Daughtry join us. Tammy is the marriage and family therapist. She is also the founder of CoParenting International, which is an organization launched to be a voice for children in divided families. And it's dedicated to providing a roadmap for co-parenting. Tammy's also the author of Co-Parenting Works, Helping Your Children Thrive After Divorce. And she is a champion for children, which I love that. And the important stuff is Tammy's married to Jay for 14 years. They are a blended family with 4 adult children, 2 son-in-laws, and 5 grandchildren. Welcome, Tammy.
Thank you, Gayla. It's always good to be with you. And yes, we now have 5 amazing grandkids. I don't know how that happened, but it did.
That's pretty exciting. And we're so blessed by the work that you do, Tammy. You have contributed so much in the field of co-parenting. And I know that's such an important topic because it can kind of be a hot topic at times. I
Oh,
have a
sure.
former spouse. My husband had a former spouse until she passed away. And then I know that you have experience with this also. And so that's what we're going to talk about, is how we deal with these co-parenting relationships that can be very tricky.
Yeah.
So, let's just start by, Tammy, you just giving a little bit of information about how you were intrigued with this topic of co-parenting. I know that you have a personal story that contributed to that.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Colorado and I have 2 amazing parents and huge extended families. I was impacted by divorce as a
Mm.
child. My parents divorced when I was just 1. And so I lived between 2 cities, 2 different houses, 2 different families. And I'm grateful for that. Lots of love, lots of great memories. But as a kid who went back and forth between those families, I had a lot of experiences that at the time I would have never really qualified under the concept of co-parenting. I was just a kid, right?
Right,
Being raised in 2 families that love me.
right.
Um, but I do have a daughter who is amazing and somehow turned 23 already. And when she was just 1, her dad and we had been married for 8 years and we came to a fork in the road of becoming co-parents. And so years ago, when I was beginning that journey as a single mom, trying to figure out how do we do this, right?
Hmm.
There's a lot of hard steps to take. I drew on my childhood experience. I also had a lot of insight from other mentors and a counselor who helped us. And I was just really committed that I never wanted Angelia to ever feel like she had to pick sides or that she was drawn into the hard part of our relationship. And so
Right.
I was very intentional, just wanting to figure out how do we do a great job at sharing a child we love and helping her have an amazing childhood. And so over time, I'll fast forward. I ended up going to grad school and becoming, getting a master's in marriage and family to really hone in on this critical topic of co-parenting. And actually, 20 years ago this year, I launched Co-Parenting International. And
That's
it's a
awesome.
combination of live events, one on one work, resources. But I just knew parents needed a place to go when they were at the beginning of the road or maybe
Mhm.
5 years down the road to figure out
Yeah.
how do we lovingly share children between 2
Right.
homes. So
Yeah.
that's
That
personal and professional for me.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that is the tricky dynamic is, and really to me, there's 2 sides to co-parenting. So there is an emotional side where
Yeah.
we have to deal with the residue perhaps from leftover relationship parts that haven't healed
Mhm.
and things that we have brought in that are affecting the way that we're co-parenting our kids.
Yes.
So but then there's also the practical side of how do we deal with just the day to day and the schedules and manage all of that with the co-parent. So we're going to talk about both of those things. We're going to start with the emotional side because I believe if we don't get the emotional side right, if we
Mm,
don't wrestle with this, what I want to say is baggage, perhaps that is left over from a marriage or a relationship breakup back here, then we
mhm.
really can't do the practical things well that also relate to co parenting. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure that you had to wrestle with some of that own emotional feelings or whatever perhaps was left over that in order to really then come full circle to the practical. Do you want to share tips about any of that?
Well, I can tell you this. I remember sitting at my old kitchen table as we were going through what is called a parenting plan, which many listeners will have done
Yes,
that, or they might be just getting started with that. And I knew 2 things. I knew we had the best thing in common, and is that we both loved our daughter, and we absolutely wanted what was best for her. We might have had different perspectives about what that might be, but I knew that her dad loved her deeply, and I
mhm,
knew that both of us figuring out how to forgive each other and to forgive ourselves for the pain and the process we'd been through. I think a lot of times, Christians, especially, we wrestle with going through the divorce and feeling like we can't forgive our former spouse, we can't forgive ourselves. Other people don't understand why this is happening, and so it gets really hard in there
right.
to think clearly. And so my number one goal was to always figure out, how do I let God help heal me and
Yes,
let me be the best version of myself for everyone. First
right,
and foremost for Angelia, but in dealing with her dad, I wanted us to get along. I wanted us to do a good job and never be enemies, because I knew what she needed from us, and she needed us to be at a place of peace. And
right,
so I think forgiveness sometimes gets tricky. Um, this is a short webinar, so we can't dig deep into a lot of topics, but I
right.
think the gift and the choice to forgive,
Mhm,
whether it's forgiving your former spouse, forgiving someone else in your life that hurt you, we can make those choices even if they never see it the same way. And
mhm.
even if they never directly agree that this is what happened. And I think that's important for moms and dads across the board
Mhm.
to let go, ask God to help our hearts heal so that we can live the rest of our lives as a joyful parent and not an angry ex.
Exactly. And we're going to go ahead and continue in that discussion. And I just want to make one more quick reminder of if you are watching and you want to remind some folks to tag their friends, then, just go ahead and do that. It's a great way for people to watch us now or watch us later because it will be recorded. And to be
Mhm.
sure that you can put your questions in the comments also, and Tammy and I will get to those as we can. But Tammy, I'm completely in agreement with what you're saying. The piece about wrestling with forgiveness is so important because
Mhm.
that really is it has everything to do with our ability to be a good co-parent, because if
Mhm.
we are constantly carrying anger and resentment, then every time we try to have communication with our former spouse, those emotions rise up in us, and
Yeah.
it makes it that much harder to try to be cooperative and flexible and all those things that we have to do in regards to co-parenting. And I just want to say, I know it's not easy. I have walked this road, and I will say I didn't do a great job of forgiving my
Mm.
former spouse in the beginning. There was some grief and suffering that honestly I felt like he was responsible for, and I struggled with forgiving him. And
Mm.
yet, what I recognized pretty quickly was that was so affecting me having any kind of a healthy relationship with him after our divorce, which then bleeds over into affecting our kids. And I think that's the main thing that we want to remember. The reason we want to co parent well is because of how our kids are affected. And
Yeah.
we don't want them to end up seeing this conflict, and they already feel after divorce or a breakup of a relationship that they are going to feel a little unsafe. Their world has been rocked in a
Mhm.
huge way. And so,
Yeah.
as parents, we have to do our part of then trying to repair that. And
Yeah.
a piece of that has to do with the forgiveness.
Yes, and it's a gift we give ourselves when
Yeah.
we make a choice to forgive anyone in our life that's hurt us. It
Right.
could be family of origin, it could be a coworker, it could be any relationship. When we choose to let that go and allow God to step in and give his grace to us for any
Right.
part we played, we are free. And if we're free, then our kids are free. And I
Exactly.
knew going into being a co-parent that my daughter's dad and I would show up at every event she ever did in her life. You know, she was 1. We didn't know if she'd be into basketball, volleyball, ballet. As it turned out, she did all of it. And
Oh gosh.
we probably had 1,000 different settings that we showed up to cheer for her as her parents.
Mhm.
And I'm grateful to say that we were able to show up with respect and with kindness and
Mhm.
never made it about us. And
Right.
that was it's a muscle we grow, I think, sometimes in making a choice to show up and be respectful in public. Um,
Yes.
compartmentalizing the emotional part, talking to a counselor, talking to our best friend,
Right.
talking to somebody at church, but never talk to our kids about that
Mhm.
hard part because
Mhm.
that's not
Mhm.
their burden to carry.
No.
It's ours to work through and process with God and with other adults. And I
Right.
think that's the other side of the emotional component, as you said, is to remember our kids are not our confidant, they're not our companion, and they're not our counselor. And
Yes.
especially when they get a little older and they're teenagers and they wanna know, like, "Hey,
Mhm.
what's going on? Why are you and my dad so angry?" Or, "Why is my mom mad at you?" It's really important to put those boundaries down and to separate the emotions so that the children have the freedom to love their other parent and
Right.
not get in the middle of the adult
Yeah.
stuff. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And the other thing that I think can help us with that, if we're really struggling with doing this hard emotional work, is to remember what God has done for us and His
Oh, yes.
unconditional love and ongoing grace and mercy for us that
Yes.
is undeserved. And
Yes.
if we can remember that, then I think that can help us recognize the need to then forgive others and
Mhm.
offer them grace. And it's just like you said, Tammy, we might need to ask God to help us set aside our personal hurt so that
Mhm.
we can do that hard emotional work and be the best co-parent for our kids.
Yes. Yes, and I think one of the a very practical way that we can give a gift to our children to try to demonstrate that is, most of us when especially when our kids are little, we read them a story at bedtime, scratch their back, and tuck them in,
Right.
right? And in our nighttime prayers, I know that I tried to do this quite a bit, and I've had a lot of clients I've talked to that have implemented this, is to when you pray with your child about their day, about their family, to also pray for the other parent. And if
Yes.
parents remarried, pray for that other parent too. And
Hmm.
those can be tricky and hard things to do, but I tell you, those little moments of grace where we can
Hmm.
say, Lord, to your daughter, say, bless her dad, bless her stepmom, bless all the kids in their house. That
Right.
little simple addition into a prayer of hope is
Hmm.
part of showing our children, right, that there is grace. There's
Right.
grace on the other side.
Yeah. And the truth is, Tammy, it's hard to continue to really, if I could use the strong word, hate someone
Mm,
when you're praying for them. And so, if we can pray for a former spouse, then sometimes that does begin to change our heart. And
and
I found that in my case.
and like you said a minute ago, Gayla, the whole motivation is because we wanna give this gift to our children,
Right.
right? The one
Mhm.
thing we probably have in common with our co-parent more than any other human in the world is how much we love that child or those
Yes,
children we share.
exactly.
And setting aside the hard part and remembering, I have an opportunity to either heal their hearts or hurt their hearts.
Mhm.
And those moments like a nighttime prayer or a wave goodbye, something that is kind and respectful and gives them the our emotional permission to like and love their other parent, and
Right.
especially their other step parent, because that's a tricky
Yes,
one.
it is.
That is a gift we give the child.
Right.
We're it's all about giving those gifts to our children.
Right. And even to let them know, I'm okay for you to love your other parent and enjoy your time there. So that means there's no drama, there's no guilt trips when kids leave our home to go spend time in the other home. It's simply have a great time. I look forward to seeing you when you come back. That is, again, a gift that we are given to our kids.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me read a question that's come in and see if we can tackle this one. How do you co-parent with someone who won't co-parent? Goes through the kids with communication. I continue to reiterate communication needs to go through the parents. Any suggestions on how to handle?
Mm.
You want to tackle that one?
Well, a lot of that depends how old the kids are. I
Right,
will say we never ever want to use the children for a messenger.
right,
And so I know I tell my clients all the time, right? We can't change our co-parent. We can't make that person do the right thing or stop doing the wrong thing. But
right.
what we can control is how we do the healthiest thing. And
Exactly.
so I would say to that parent to keep doing your part, to not communicate through the children, to try to use maybe a co-parent app. I know we're going to talk about some
Yeah.
practical ideas in a minute,
Mhm.
but co-parent apps are a really great tool that can share data and information and keep children from being in the middle. And then to also really talk to the child about understanding, this is not your role to be the adult in this equation. And
Right.
to try to possibly empower that child to say, to their other parent, I don't want to be in the middle. I
Uh-huh.
really, I don't want to be the messenger. And,
Mhm.
we work with children at our center, and I know there's tons of great counselors and therapists connected to Family Life. I would say if kids are really being put in a hard burden, like that on a regular basis, maybe consider having your child talk to someone other than the parents, right?
Right.
Other than you, so that at
Right.
least you have another safe place to process some of that hard
Mhm.
stuff.
Yes.
But keep doing the right thing, even when the other party doesn't.
Right. And I love that. And I also agree with empower the child if you can. And that is going to depend on the age of the child. Some of the younger kids, that's not going to go well. But we can have those conversations with our teenagers and try to help them maybe voice back that they'd really like that to happen between the parents. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's some good help. Okay, let's turn the corner, Tammy, and
Okay.
let's talk about the tips for healthy co parenting. So, this is going to be more of just how we manage the day-to-day stuff. So I'm
Yeah.
just going to pitch it to you and say, what would be your favorite kind of healthy tip that you would give about co-parenting?
Well, something that a child is going to experience probably 400 to 800 times in their life, if they have parents that are co-parenting, is what we call the handoff. And how
Yeah,
we handle the handoff, I think, has a huge part to do with how children experience their life and even how they identify the kind of family they came from. So I really feel it's important to give some tips about doing a good job of that handoff, because no matter where it happens physically, if it's at mom's house, dad's house, at Walmart, at Chick-fil-A, the experience for the child is a tough one, right? They're
yes,
leaving one parent they love, they're going to another parent they love, and that exchange process is hard already on kids.
right.
So the number one tip I would say there is never, ever, ever talk about co-parent business at the handoff.
Yes,
Don't talk about child support. Don't talk about cleats for football or soccer or switching Friday for Saturday. Don't do the business of co-parenting at the handoff. Use an app, use a co-parent meeting, a pre-planned time that you talk by phone or meet in person. Utilize some compartmentalized time and place to talk about those details, so that that experience for your child is quick, simple, and positive. And
yes,
the other thing, Gayla, that I always ask my clients and try to remind them to do, and I was always very intentional, was to think about three core things of communication at the handoff: my facial expression, my body language, and my tone of voice. Because as I prepare a child to leave me, what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and what my posture is, they feel the emotional element of that.
right.
So we want to be really careful. Whatever's happening inside of us, we want to remember, what is the behavior I want to exhibit? Do I want to help empower my child to go enjoy the time at the other house? And the analogy I always say, Gayla, is remember the day you cheered them on to go to school, right? First day they
Yeah,
went to kindergarten, or
right.
maybe their first overnight camp, right? You
Mhm.
use an upbeat tone of voice and you talk about the good things they're going to go do, and you highlight it, right? You walk alongside and you empower them. Use that same loving motivation and positivity at a handoff, because
Mhm.
kids need their parents' emotional permission to come and go.
Right.
When we do it different, when we're angry or we're cold or we don't talk to the other person, or we tell our kids, I'm not going to step out there and talk to your other parent, that makes it 10 times harder for the
Oh,
kids. So
absolutely.
trying to
Mhm.
manage that, I think, is one of those. It's emotional still, but it's practical in not doing co-parent business, using an app, having a meeting, and really minding how we present ourselves at that exchange.
Right. And there are several apps that are healthy, easy to use in regards to co parenting. And I agree, those are some great things. And then, Tammy, I also want to talk about the role of a stepmom. I think we primarily have talked about kind of as a bio mom if you're dealing with a former spouse, but there's
Mhm.
also a role that a stepmom can play if your spouse has a former spouse. And so you also get tangled in this web a little bit and wonder what your part can be. And one of the things I
Mm.
would say is if that is a contentious relationship between your spouse and his former spouse, you can be the one that can be the sounding board at times, or the encouragement of helping them see that it's really so much better for your kids if you guys can figure out how to get along, or at least get along in front of the kids. Because, Tammy, the truth is, when we are emotionally charged, we can't see all that is going on and we don't recognize the effects of it. And I really want to encourage stepmoms who also are in this tanglement that they have a role that can be very effective in helping their spouse see the benefits of getting along with their former spouse.
Absolutely. And I'll say, Gayla, I wear a lot of hats. I am a bonus mom to 3 kids who lost their mom actually in a
Mhm.
car accident, sadly.
Mm.
But I grew up and had an awesome stepmom. And as a kid, putting on my 15-year-old me hat,
Uh-huh.
I can tell you, I know I was a difficult stepkid. And
Yeah.
part of this journey, it's sticky between bio moms and stepmoms, and that
It is.
relationship is
Mhm.
really important for
Right.
children. And so I will say that, as my daughter, I'm so grateful. She gained a stepmom when she was 5, and she has been a wonderful part of her life.
Mm.
And this may sound a little crazy, but I actually tried several times along the way. I wasn't consistent all the time, but I always tried to highlight important dates, maybe Mother's Day, send her a card and say, thanks
Oh,
for loving our daughter.
yes.
When we started having the co-parent meetings and they were engaged getting married, I invited her to those meetings. And when my daughter asked me the big question of, what am I going to call her? I
Oh.
said, "Honey," I said, "you and your dad can call her whatever you want." And she
Mm.
said, "Well, it's gonna kind of be like having 2 moms." And I said, "It is, honey."
Mhm.
And I told her, and it was a moment that the Lord was so good to me, because I remember thinking her stepmom has 3 other children, right? So when our daughter's there, she's gonna be around 3 other kids that call her mom. So I
Right.
I told her, I said, "Honey, you can call her mom if you want." Because
Wow.
I never ever wanted Angelia to feel like she had to worry about labels and titles.
Right.
And I tried to always remember any chance I could to highlight to Angelia ways that I supported her stepmom, that I
Right.
expect her to respect her stepmom, because
Mhm.
I never wanted her to feel like we didn't get along. And
Mhm.
so that's a tricky one. And I think it takes a lot of compartmentalizing, right, to
Mhm.
see beyond what each party might wonder about each other. But know that if you're a bio mom or a stepmom and you can build a bridge with that other woman, it
Mhm.
is one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids.
Yes, I
To
agree.
see you walk alongside each other with respect, that says a lot. And so
Yeah,
I would encourage people to try to think about what could they do to make that a
exactly.
healthy dynamic.
Right, right. And also, as we think about things that we can do to help the co-parenting relationship, one of the things I tried to do was to stay out of the business of my former spouse. So don't meddle in
Mm,
the affairs in his home. And that is hard to do, especially when you know that perhaps that former spouse is there's some behavior going on that you're not real pleased about. There are things
mm,
perhaps your kids are being exposed to that you're a little concerned about. Now, I'm not saying that we allow unsafe behavior or immoral behavior or things like that, but I am saying it's real normal to have differences in the way we parent. And we
yeah,
think that once we are no longer married, that we can still have control and try to tell them how to parent or how to do things with our kids. And sadly, that is a consequence of divorce, is that we
yeah.
lose control with the kids when they're in that other parent's home. So I think that we have to be mindful of let them parent, let them have the things in their home and manage things as they deem appropriate. And unless we see something that is alarming to us, which of course
Right.
we would address, but otherwise, I think that's another way to try to maintain a peaceful co parenting relationship.
Well, and I know Ron Deal has always talked about the analogy of 2 countries, that kids come and go between 2 different countries with different cultures, and they may all speak English or they may speak the similar language, but they operate differently.
Yes.
And I think the difference is in how those 2 adults view the world.
Hmm.
They are more objectively different when they are divorced, and
Hmm.
there's no motivation to navigate to a neutral. So
Right.
I do think that is a hard thing to do, but it's important. And Gayla, one of the places I see that show up all the time is how families handle screens and
Oh,
electronic devices.
right. Yeah.
And I would love to just put in a short mention that Covenant Eyes has amazing free ebooks for families.
Hmm.
If you go to their website, there's a ton of great resource for every age and stage of child to help children have safety interactions with the internet. And I
Okay.
I see that in one of the biggest concerns in divorced
Yes.
families,
Yes.
and yet there's no roadmap on how to do it in collaboration. So
Right.
I think,
Mhm.
um, yeah, the countries operate different sometimes, but the topics, like you said, um, sometimes you have to just step back and realize not every hill is a hill to die on.
Yeah,
Sometimes
exactly.
there are a few, but not every hill.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing, Tammy, that is often handled very differently is money.
Mm,
And I know that we have viewers who are probably dealing with that, and that can be a tough dynamic with co parents. And how we manage the money side if we feel like there needs to be a tough conversation or we feel it is not being managed well. I wonder what input
mhm.
you would give to help with that on that subject.
Well, and are you saying money as far as being very lavish with the kids, or
Right, like
okay.
one home, let's say it's Christmas time and one home really wants to be what sometimes we term a Disneyland dad,
Mm,
and then the other home is being a little more frugal and trying to really teach the basics to kids, and so I think that can be frustrating as a parent when you feel a little bit like you're in competition with a former spouse.
oh, sure. Well, and having been a kid that grew up in a divided family all of my life, a
Hmm.
lot of things were different between the 2
Hmm.
houses,
Right,
and sometimes I think people leverage that with a negative motivation, and sometimes it's just different. And I
right.
would say the most important part of that is what is the meaning that the parent assigns it. If there's a conversation of, for a negative example, let's say mom makes a lot of money and dad doesn't. And if dad, says negative things about mom, well, gosh, she's always just buying you stuff, or um, she's too commercial, and she worries about brand names and whatnot. That kind of thing, that's going to hurt a kid to hear
Right,
negativity from either parent about the other. I
right.
would say in trying to equip a child to be ready for the real world out there, they're going to meet people in junior high, high school, and certainly in college that have very different means. And I
Yes,
think equipping a child to figure out, what does money mean to me? And is it emotion, because for women money's emotional, for men it's a little more practical. And I think there's a lot there that could be a a potential teaching point on
Mhm.
how people see money, and it's different.
Right.
I would say if a parent is feeling like the other one is just trying to outdo them all the time, and they're in competition, or maybe they undermine them and go buy the next nice thing that, let's say mom was going to buy the new uh, whatever. I don't know. I don't know all the technology today, but
Yeah.
some gaming system for a kid, right? And dad goes and buys it first. You know what? Step back and be grateful your child has it, right?
Right.
And try
Mhm.
not to add to it with your
Right.
own feelings. I think you have to talk to your best friend about it, and you have to process the frustration,
Yes.
but
Uh-huh.
try not to add that onto your child's plate, because really, I don't know any kid that's not going to be grateful for stuff. They're
Right.
always going to like the double presents and all, and trying not to let them know you have frustration about that, I think, is
Mhm.
your choice of filtering out your personal feelings and trying to process that with another adult.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and then as I agree, and then a couple of other things just to reference in regards to healthy
Yeah.
co-parenting is to really separate the old marriage issues from the current parenting issues. And we've talked a little bit about this in the forgiveness piece, but there can be other things that we kind of have stereotyped our former spouse about. And so then every time we have interactions with them, we have trouble separating, and we
Mhm.
have to really just think about, okay, this is a schedule issue. Yes, I need to talk to him. This is Johnny's not doing well at school. Yes, I need to talk to my former spouse about it. But there's just some dissension that is happening because you catch that tone of voice that you've heard before, and you know that they're just being a little short with you, and you want to address it. No, that's just an old marital issue, that unless it's really something that's happening frequently and you need to address it, that's one thing. But I think that we just need to be mindful of, it's real easy to have these old marital issues that kind of bleed over, and we just want to
Mhm.
stay focused on anything that relates to the kids. That's the purpose of our co-parenting relationship.
Yes, and I would say we all have triggers. We
Yes,
have triggers from our childhood, we have triggers from our former, spouse, and they probably have them with us. And
right.
so trying to figure out what are those places that, man, when that happens, I just want to be rude,
Mhm.
or I want to kind of keep on an inappropriate response to the current situation. I
Right.
still think it's important with those things to have someone healthy and safe to talk
Hmm.
to have I call those our 3 a.m. friends, to have a friend who you can call and say, "Man, I just had this experience with my co-parent, and can I talk to you about it for 10 minutes?" Because if we
Right.
can air it out with someone who's healthy and safe, and a friend who's not gonna just throw gas on the fire, right, and
Exactly.
make it worse,
Hmm.
but
Right.
somebody who really has our best interest in mind and will listen with some objectivity, then
Hmm.
I think that helps us to not have the reaction to that person that we might otherwise have.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
we we really, like I've said earlier, we can't change them. We can't make them stop doing the wrong thing or start doing the right thing. And sometimes there are those triggers that come up. And sometimes another person will do it on purpose. I mean, in the
Mm.
work I've done, Gayla, I can't believe some of the things parents will do to alienate and push the other parent out of a child's life, and to make it hard on the child to have a good relationship with them.
Right.
I think checking your motive, right? If there is something to address, make sure your motive is really about the child and not creating some kind of drama or hard situation that's unnecessary.
Right.
So I do think we all, I mean, I still have things I'm working through as an adult from all my life,
Exactly, right,
so
yeah, yeah, and
aware, but
another thing that, we often talk about is to not talk bad about the other parent, but, what if we're seeing our child exhibit negative behavior that the other parent is actively teaching him, and
mm,
maybe it's lying or maybe it's being deceptive? I think that is behavior then that we have to talk about. We have to address that with a former spouse.
sure, absolutely. I would say if it is something that's really becoming a problem at school or in other relationships, or they're just directly undermining you and your parenting,
Mhm.
then that does qualify for an important conversation with the other parent. And
Yes.
unfortunately, sometimes those parents just don't want to listen, and they
Mhm.
really don't want to change. And
Right.
so you come back to the part I can control, which is kids get older, these things do get harder, quite
Mhm.
honestly.
They do.
And reminding your child, I know, a lot of the families I've worked with, these phones and devices really become one of those things that, I mean, I've had kids tell their parent, "Well, my other parent paid for this phone. You can't take it away from me. You
Oh,
can't tell me to turn it off." And it really undermines their parenting. And in
right.
those cases, I truly believe parents have to talk about that. There have to be
Exactly.
some clear boundaries that at mom's house, mom does get to make the rules. At dad's house, dad makes the rules.
Mhm.
And those devices that go back and forth, if they don't have a plan before they give those to the kids, it will become a tangled mess,
No,
and
absolutely. Mm.
kids will try to utilize that
Mhm.
against, because kids want what kids want. Even
Mhm.
great kids are selfish.
Right,
So,
right, and
um,
and that's the thing, we're not saying not to address these things, but I think we are saying don't do it at the handoff. Maybe you
right.
schedule a co-parenting meeting that needs to happen in a public place. If you're dealing with a former spouse who tends to be, a little hostile or you're
Yeah.
concerned about how a difficult conversation is gonna go, schedule a meeting in a public place because have you ever
Yeah.
noticed, Tammy, that people are a little more mature in public?
Yes, I say that all the time, Gayla. Absolutely.
And
Uh,
so those are places that we can feel safe in having hard conversations with, a former spouse. I definitely
yeah.
encourage that. So,
Well, and
we there's oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say that's one of the handouts. We've got some free handouts if people want to
Yes.
connect with us over at our website. Um, we've got one that is about the co-parent meeting, some topics, some things to talk about, how to handle that. We've got one on 10 things kids of divorce wish they could tell their parents. It's a really
Wonderful.
good, solid list for parents to kind of internally reflect on how am I doing, on these 10 things. And then we've got the 5 categories of co-parenting, and then a really thorough handout on handling the handoff. And those are all free if people want to connect with us and um, just have more tools for a longer conversation, or
Yes.
more resources for themselves.
Right, yeah. That is wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for all that you do in the realm of co-parenting, Tammy. There's so much that we
Mm.
could talk about in our brief conversation. We couldn't cover everything, so we hope that our viewers will stay tuned as we continue to cover things related to women and blended families. So, thank you for joining us, Tammy. We're thankful for you.
Thank you, Gayla, and thank you to the whole Family Life team. You guys are champions.
Well, thank you. And we are excited to our viewers about next month. We will be having a conversation with educator Nan Deal on back to school. And we'll talk about how we help to have home and school relationships thrive, how we help our kids begin a new school year with hope and expectations that it can be a good year, and what we can do as parents to contribute to that. So, that is our live stream for the month of August. We come to you the second Tuesday of every month at 3 o'clock Central. You can watch it live or you can watch it later for the recorded version. So thank you for joining us, friends. Keep pressing on, ladies. To those who are faithful, God shows himself faithful. We'll see you next time.